an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Crooked Kingdom by Leigh Bardugo, brought to you by Jaime, everybody's favorite co-host. In this episode, I'm going to talk about how impressed I continue to be with Kaz, how impressed I'm also going to continue to be with Inej, I think, because this bitch, seriously, I would just cave. And also, I did not know how long this withdrawal was going to go on for Nina, and I feel really bad for her. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. So yes, again, thank you to Jaime for commissioning this episode. And Jaime is actually here with me in the chat right now. So that's exciting. So these chapters, guys, the next one, because it's been a little while, Jaime, I was just talking yesterday in the cocktail hour, I think, about how I'm thinking about putting some restrictions on how long we can go between episodes before I decide that I'm not going to be able to continue coverage of something, because there is the danger of it being so long that by the time somebody orders another episode, I might have to go back and reread so much that it winds up being a ton of extra time. So it's been almost we're a week shy of 3 months since the last episode of Crooked Kingdom. And I was thinking that was going to be my cutoff, was 3 months. So you got in there just under the wire. And indeed, I did have to go back and reread the last episode, or the last book chapter, because I completely lost track of how far I had even gotten. I didn't even realize that I had only done one episode covering this book. I thought for some reason that I had done two. And there's a lot of moving parts to keep track of in this story. So I really wanted to do that justice and make sure that I wasn't forgetting, because I want to be able to make educated guesses on what I think could happen. And if I don't remember all of the players and what they did and do, it's not going to come across as an educated guess, because I'm just going to say a bunch of bullshit. So Jaime says that makes so much sense with this book, especially. Yeah. I may need to keep commissioning this one on my own so that you have to finish it. Well, ma'am, if you feel moved to do so, I was also saying in the previous, I think it was cocktail hour last night, that I know a lot of people who had been commissioning this book, people who were super excited about it, have since stopped being Unspoiled listeners, due to an incident. So that was going to be who sort of I was depending on to continue this. And those folks are not part of this anymore. They're also not part of Veronica Mars anymore. So the commissions for that has also fallen off in terms of consistency. But it's a shame, because that puts all the pressure on everybody who remains. And maybe you can canvas for other people, Jaime, and see who isn't an Unspoiled listener already and maybe would be down to, if they're a huge fan of these books, get in on this with you. But I'll be going out there and guilt some people. Yes. All right. So the last chapter before this section ended, and I forgot all about this, with Jesper's father showing up. And the crew is all sort of I know that they're saying that your father's here, but is he though? And then they're and even if he is here, this is definitely probably part of a trap and a setup. So be super careful. And I have to admit, it didn't even enter my mind that his dad was part of a trap and a setup. And it turns out he is part of a trap and a setup, but he isn't aware of it. And that's that's the reason that it didn't occur to me, was there was never anything in my understanding of Jesper's relationship with his parents that indicated they would be trying to take him down or get back at him or anything like that. And so I just was like, well, no, he's not. And it turns out, like, you can be and not even be aware of it. Because as things are explained, it becomes clearer and clearer that the bank has decided that they need the money that is owed them a lot sooner than they originally said, because they're trying to push him into this move of coming to see his son and find out what the fuck is going on. Because, for those who don't remember, Jesper's whole thing was that he was going to university. He's been lying to his dad that he's still in university, even though he dropped out ages ago. And he is supposed to be getting the money together so that his father can keep the farm. And his dad's trying to get in touch with him, but because of the circumstances of what's been going on lately and the type of life Jesper lives in general, he has not been somebody that you can reach. So his father just keeps on trying to write to him and send him letters and figure out where he is. And when he gets in touch with people at the university, everybody's like, Jesper? Oh yeah, I think I remember him from like freshman year, right? No, we haven't seen that guy in ages. And his dad is kind of like, excuse me? Well, what the fuck happened to him? And Ketterdam doesn't have a great reputation. Understandably. So he starts to get really worried and decides that he's going to come, which is exactly what Van Eck wanted him to do. Because Van Eck is in with everything, right? He's the guy who's like got control over practically half the city. He's got tons of money to be able to bribe people. And he probably pulled some strings for the bank to demand their money sooner. So this whole confrontation with his dad, and I say confrontation, Jesper's sort of waiting for it to be a confrontation. It turns out that his dad is genuinely happy to see him and like worried about him. And that's so much worse. Like, he is just so ready for his father to be like, what the fuck? You told me you had this in hand. What have you been doing? I can't believe you dropped out of school. I'm so disappointed in you. And instead, when he walks up, his dad is like, hey, there he is. And Jesper's like, oh God. Oh, he has no idea. So yeah, I am really here for more of his dad, because his dad is sort of serving as a little bit of an audience surrogate. And that's not entirely like, at this point, really necessary, because we know so much of what's happening, but it is helpful to have him around so that they explain things to him and I get it. Because there were times where they would explain things to each other and they were still using so much shorthand because of how much they take it for granted that they understand each other, which they did, that I would have to read and reread things a few times to be like, oh, okay, I remember who they're talking about and why that makes sense. So I am thankful that this guy is part of this and that there's like one person who's sort of pure. Wylan has been a little bit pure, but he's been corrupted at this point. I'm fine with that. That's not a problem or anything. But I'm looking forward, honestly, I'm looking forward to his dad being corrupted as well. So I'm not guaranteeing that will happen, but I think it will. And I have a feeling his dad is naive and very innocent, but I don't get the impression he's a stupid person. So I'm hoping that he will turn out to actually be, maybe useful is the wrong word, but I think it's the only word that really works in terms of him getting to stick around with everybody. Because if you're not useful, Kaz doesn't really need you for anything, you know? So, unless it says motivation to keep Jesper in line, which is certainly, again, that's not nothing. I'm a big fan of Kaz holding Jesper to the fact that he needs to make amends because he fucked up. I understand that to a degree it was a mistake and an accident, but it's the sort of thing that I really side with Kaz on this, in that I don't have a lot of tolerance for people who should know better letting their guard down about things that are just sort of like, they're intrinsic to everything working out. And if getting the money to keep your father from losing his farm wasn't enough motivation for Jesper to not fuck up, what is, dude? Like, he had as much riding on this as anybody, and he still ruined it by letting things slip. So it's pretty excusable to me that Kaz is reacting this way to everything, because he's just kind of like, now I have to kind of use your dad against you a little bit, because evidently the stakes before weren't high enough for you for whatever reason. So guess what? And I kind of feel him on that. I can't lie. I don't have a lot of like patience for that sort of thing. But forgive me, guys. I'm getting ahead of myself, because the next chapter right after this is Inej. And this is exciting because Inej was kidnapped. So this is the first time that we get to see like the circumstances behind which she is, behind which she was taken, where she's being kept, or where she thinks she's being kept, how she's being treated, who's talking to her, who has contact with her. And in summary, she doesn't really remember anything after being like scooped up by the squallers. Apparently they like knocked her on the head and she passed out, and she woke up and she was tied up somewhere and she had a blindfold on. And she has been waited on, attended to, I guess, by a fellow Suli named Bajan. And Bajan is a music teacher who is very good looking. And Inej is sort of wondering to herself whether or not Van Eck is aware of just how good looking this dude is, because his wife is much younger than him, than Van Eck, and having her alone with this tutor who is this attractive is probably not the smartest thing that he could ever do, which leads me to wonder if maybe the child that she's carrying isn't his, which I would be delighted by, because fuck this guy. And I am just, all right, look, I know I shouldn't have gotten my hopes up, but I did. So Inej decides that she is going to do her best to get herself out of this situation, because shit is bad. And she wants to believe that Kaz and everybody are coming for her, but she keeps on underestimating her own value to Kaz, because she really doesn't think that he's going to do anything if it doesn't benefit him, because she doesn't understand how much he really cares about her. So she's not 100% confident that he's even going to come out here. She's wondering if, he's going to just hand over this kid that Van Eck's after, take some money and bail and let that be that, and not bother with her at all. And it's a little bit unbelievable to me that she doesn't, after the conversation that she and Kaz had, that she really thinks Kaz would just like let her rot. But at the same time, Kaz has made a point of his reputation being that he is so ruthless. So, I feel like it's a shame that she doesn't trust him more, but Kaz doesn't want to be trusted. As so he like kind of doesn't have anybody but himself to blame for the fact that she is so full of doubt as to whether or not he's going to come. And Jaime says, I think it's self-preservation on her part too. I think so too. Like there's probably just, an element of like, even if I do think he's coming, I can't let myself rely on that. Like Inej she's nothing if not self-sufficient. She is really going to try and take care of herself as much as she can without worrying or depending on anyone else. So what she decides to do is starve herself so that she loses a bunch of weight and she will be able to fit through this very small vent that's at the top of one of the walls in this room that she's being kept in. I should have known this was a setup. All right, I admit it. I should have known. But I didn't. I just wanted her to succeed so bad, guys. I really did. So, and the fact that Bajan is saying, you really need to eat more. Like, he's keeping an eye on the fact that she's not eating. They have to know that she's not, like, the only reason to not eat when you're taken prisoner is either because you are trying to kill yourself via starvation, or because you are giving into despair and have just sort of like lost your will to live, or because you have a plan and your plan depends on you being really thin. There's really only those three options. And Bajan is noticing that she's not eating. Apparently, so has Van Eck. And I feel like they know she's not somebody who's going to give in to despair. And she's definitely not going to be trying to kill herself. Like, she hasn't got that. She's still got defiance and that sort of spark in her that's making her. So it makes sense that they sensed something here. And later on, she theorizes that the only reason the vent was even open and accessible for her was because he was setting her up. So once she is captured again and put back in here, the vent is like bolted in place and she can't open it again. So yeah, it's messed up. And when she finally gets through, she comes out in a theater and Van Eck is just sitting there waiting for her. And I have to say that I had a real, bad feeling about it when she describes how the room is set up, or what the, where is it? I'm trying to find the exact moment. Your friends are not coming. Bajan's trying to, reason with her at this point, and his tone has changed, because up until now, he's been sort of lackadaisical about, hey, you really should cooperate with us. It'll be fine. But recently, it's started to turn into something more frantic, where he's like, girl, no, you really should, listen to him and really, try and cooperate with him. Seriously. And she senses that things are escalating a little bit, and that makes her more motivated to get out of here. So when she finally, gets through and she sees the stage, it says, The curtains bracketing the stage hung in shreds. No one had bothered to take down the set from the last play. It looked like a child's terrified vision of a surgeon's operating room, oversized saws and mallets hanging from the walls. Inej recognized it as the set for The Madman and the Doctor, one of the short plays from the Comédie Brute, or Brute. I don't know how you say that. I heard that, and I got real nervous. This is a particular, I'm not even sure if phobia is the word I want. But because I'm not afraid of doctors, I'm not afraid of dentists, I'm not afraid of needles or getting, cut open for them to go in and do surgery. I have a probably unhealthy amount of trust in doctors that they know what they're doing. And so I've never had that sort of phobia, but I, in particular, have always had a strong reaction to people using medical equipment as torture, or as a means of treating something that isn't something that needs to be treated, such as a mental illness. Not that doesn't need to be treated, but not in this fashion. Those of you who have watched Penny Dreadful will know what I'm talking about. It's this sort of setup, and it being, I think, under this veneer of oh, well, this is all medically sound and either sanctioned or thought through because we're smart and we're just doing what's logical here. There's something about that terrifies me. And it's not really even applicable to this situation, because they're going into this and they're going to torture her. And it's very clear that's what's happening. But that whole vibe of it, and the fact that it's on a stage, even though there's not really anybody there except for his henchmen. So it's not there's a bunch of people watching and getting off on this or anything. But the whole atmosphere of it just fucking squicked me out so bad, you guys. I can't adequately express to you how nervous this made me. It was hard to keep my cool. And it's hard for Inej to keep her cool. She really tries to. She makes a fucking damn good effort, at being fine, do what you want to me. I'm not going to fucking tell you anything. Go ahead. Do it. Whatever. Do it. And Van Eck is a little bit too perceptive. And he figures out exactly the thing that will get her to sort of cave. And I say cave in that what she says is, if you break me, Kaz won't have any use for me and he won't trade for me. That's what she says. And that's what she thinks resonates with Van Eck and gets him to stop. I disagree. I think this was all meant to be a scare tactic. I don't think he intended to actually do anything to her here. This is the first time that she has been subjected to a threat of physical violence other than being imprisoned. So you can't go in that hard right away. You have to allow them to stew a little bit and see if they'll just see reason for the sake of it. And then when it becomes clear they're not going to cooperate on this level, you start to escalate a little bit. And you can't go straight from her being imprisoned and trying to escape to then you breaking her legs irreparably. Like, as much as I'm not putting it past him that he would do this. Like, I have no doubt if things continued in this way for another week or so, that eventually he might. But at this point, I don't think it's due to her figuring out the exact right thing to say that he stops this. I think he planned to stop it. And the fact that she broke and said something like that to try and convince him, he considers just her doing that a victory. Because it's her taking the threat seriously, right? She's the whole time that they're like strapping her down and getting her in place, she's got a lot of bravado and it's just like, do whatever you want. I'm not even scared. Fine, go ahead. I'm not talking. And this is the first indication that she's given that she's like, oh shit. Oh shit. Oh shit. Oh shit. Like, I would consider that a win if I were him. You know, she's realizing that this is real. And that's pretty valuable if you're him. So anyway, I just wanted to get that clear because Van Eck is smarter than she gives him credit for. He's not as smart as she starts to give him credit for later, but he is smarter than she thought. He's obviously smarter than Kaz thought, or stupider, depending on your perspective of fucking Kaz Brecker over. So I'm trying to like make sure that I've covered everything in this particular chapter, because she's thinking about when she gets brought back, Bajan. They're both Suli, and they're to a point they sort of like bond over that, but she is really unimpressed with the fact that he has aligned himself with somebody like Van Eck and is also trying to distance himself from it, like he's not participating in all of this. She has no tolerance for that at all. She's like, you're standing here letting him do this. You are just as bad. In fact, you know what? You're not even as respectable as he is, because at least he's the one with a fucking spine who's doing this shit. But you're over here complicit and trying to maintain plausible deniability, which is despicable and pathetic and cowardly. So, you know what? I respect you less than him. And finally, she says something to him later. Bajan moved to place the blindfold over her eyes. I'm sorry, he whispered. I didn't know he intended... Kadema Mahim. Bajan flinched. Don't say that. The Suli were a close people, loyal. They had to be, in a world where they had no land and where they were so very few. Inej's teeth were chattering, but she forced out the words. You are forsaken. As you have turned your back on me, so will they turn their backs on you. It was the worst of Suli denunciations, one that forbade you the welcome of your ancestors in the next world and doomed your spirit to wander without a home. Bajan paled. I don't believe any of that. You will. He secured the blindfold around her head. She heard the door close. Well, Bajan, I believe she made her point clear. And he says, I don't believe any of that. Yeah, all right, buddy. You literally went pale. People don't go pale over shit they don't buy. So that's pretty much the end of her chapter. And then we go into part 2, A Killing Wind. Jesper's POV. Him meeting up with his dad and all of this. He doesn't have his guns. We find out later that Kaz indeed was able to get the guns back. But at this point, Jesper doesn't have them and is feeling pretty much naked without them. But he also recognizes that even if they hadn't been bet, because Jesper bet them away in the last section when he was going up against What's-His-Face, and he needed to keep him at the table. So he's realizing, like, he's supposed to be playing the part of a student when he goes and visits his dad, and he can't be fucking packing when he runs into this guy. Like, it doesn't mesh with this whole falsehood that he's telling, basically. It's kind of funny, too, because later on they, like, let his dad know that Jesper's into some shit, and basically that he's, like, a criminal now, but they don't tell him the truth about the circumstances of it. Because, in case anybody doesn't remember, Jesper really did come to Ketterdam with the intention of being a student and studying, getting a job, and, sending money home and all of that. And there's a section that I really liked. Wylan shifted the strap of his satchel. He thinks the barrel distracts men from work and industry and leads to degeneracy. He may have a point, said Jesper. He sometimes wondered what might have happened if he'd never gone out with his new friends that night, if he'd never walked into that gambling parlor and taken that first spin at Macker's wheel. It was meant to be harmless fun, and for everyone else it had been. But Jesper's life had split like a log into 2 distinct and uneven pieces, the time before he'd stepped up to that wheel, and every day since. I love this. Based on this and what Nina's going through in her chapter after this, I really feel like Leigh Bardugo either has personal experience herself with addiction or is very close to somebody who does. Because that rings so incredibly true. Like, if you are a person who has struggled with addiction, you remember the moment that you were introduced to the thing that changed everything for you. When I was going to AA meetings with my father as a kid, I remember that there was a guy in those meetings who had only ever had one drink in his life. But that one drink was enough for him to realize, oh, no, I cannot be trusted. This is going to be a problem for me. And he so believed that it was going to be a problem that he went to AA meetings every week after that first drink, never drank again, but kept coming to meetings because he wanted to drink again. And it was that one first time that he knew. And I think we if you are somebody who has struggled with addiction, you can pinpoint that, and the way that this is described, his life split like a log into 2 distinct and uneven pieces, is such a beautiful way to say that. Because it is, and they are totally uneven pieces, especially if you encounter this early in your life, which most people do. They're experimenting when they're kids. They're getting involved with different pieces of the world that they haven't engaged with yet. And it changes everything. So I just thought that was really, really well done. And it's part of the reason why nobody tells his father the truth about how he wound up losing all this money and how he's fallen off of going to school and everything, because people don't have a lot of sympathy or understanding for addicts. And it's always treated as just sort of a personality deficiency. It's an indicator of having low moral character or discipline or self-control. And it's not that simple, but most people don't respect that. And there's like no telling exactly how Jesper's father would react, but they would rather sidestep the possibility of him blaming his son and getting into all of that completely. So what they tell his dad happened is that he was taken the way that Kaz was taken in a bad con, you know. And it's supposed to be that Jesper and Wylan and Wylan's, quote, twin brother all were in on it together and all lost their money together. And now they're like trying to get back what they lost, either that or at the very least, like take revenge somehow. And it's a respectable story. Like, it mirrors what Kaz went through enough to have the ring of truth to it. It's Kaz who like says a lot of the little details that make this feel like it's got some teeth. But I can't help but think it's going to be revealed sooner rather than later that this is not what's actually happening. I think it all depends on how perceptive Jesper's father is. And right now, I don't have a good beat on that because his father's a farmer. So the kind of perception that you have to have when you're in that line of work is probably very different. He might be a perceptive person when it comes to things that I wouldn't think of. But when it comes to like human nature or worrying about like being swindled or the way that the city works, you know, he goes to the cops looking for his son. He doesn't have any idea what Jesper's involved with and that you shouldn't trust the cops because why wouldn't he trust the cops, right? He's a law-abiding citizen. Bless his heart. So this just changes up a lot of the... I'm just very curious how this is all going to play together because Jesper can't just like set his father free into the city and be like, I'll figure this out. Wait for me. His dad is a very valuable chip. Somebody's going to swoop down and scoop him up and take him prisoner because it's becoming clearer and clearer that Inej isn't going to be enough. So they have to keep him close, but they also have to like shield him from what's really going on. And I don't think that's sustainable. Okay. So the meetup, as I said, is a lot friendlier than Jesper ever anticipated. This thing, I'm going to read this. His father's head snapped up, and Jesper steeled himself for what might come next. Whatever insults or outrage his father hurled at him, he deserved. But he wasn't prepared for the relieved grin that split his father's craggy features. Someone might as well have put a bullet right in Jesper's heart. "Jess!" his father cried. And then Jesper was crossing the courtyard, and his father's arms were tight around him, hugging him so hard Jesper thought he actually felt his ribs bend. "All saints, I thought you were dead. They said you weren't a student here anymore, that you just vanished, and I wasn't sure you'd been stuck through by bandits or the like in this saint-forsaken place." So they're in the middle of this little, like, lovely meetup, and that's going a lot better than Jesper ever thought, when somebody starts firing on him. Surprise! Luckily, they had an inkling that this was going to happen, but I don't think that they anticipated just how many men there were going to be, because I think later on, Kaz says something like that he spotted 10, which, that's pretty impressive, to be honest. Like, it's almost a compliment, you know, to send that many. Wylan, for his part, is, can I just say that I'm really starting to ship Jesper and Wylan, like, more than I even was before. Because Wylan, before everything starts to go left and they realize that they're being shot at, he's sort of handling the awkwardness better than Jesper even is, because Jesper's so nervous and trying so hard to, like, gauge what he should tell his father and what he shouldn't, like, share, that he isn't really taking this situation in hand. And Wylan is the one that's like, maybe we should take your father to lunch. Like, there's a real sort of, like, significant other vibe to it that I really liked. And I don't know. I just really enjoy the two of them together in this way. So it turns out that Wylan has a crazy bomb. He says, let's see, Jesper exchanged a glance with Wylan. Who could it be? Jan Van Eck? A rival gang looking to settle a score? Pekka Rollins or someone else Jesper had borrowed money from? There's a long list of potential suitors. We need to get out of here before they introduce themselves more personally. Brigands? Jesper knew there was a good chance he was about to be riddled with holes, so he tried to restrain his grin. Something like that. Wylan, tell me you're packing more than pens, ink, and weevil makings. I've got 2 flash bombs and something new I rigged up with a little more, wallop. Bombs? Jesper's father asked, blinking as if to wake himself from a bad dream. Jesper shrugged helplessly. Think of them as science experiments? What kind of numbers are we up against? Asked Wylan. Look at you asking all the right questions. So, Wylan throws something out there, and Jesper, who has run out, looks up and sees it flying through the sky. Wylan, yells at him, and he shoots it, and the air explodes just as Wylan is saying, get in the water. Jesper dove into the fountain, and a second later, the air sizzled with light. When Jesper poked his soaked head out of the water, he saw that every exposed surface of the courtyard and its gardens was pocked with holes, tendrils of smoke rising from the tiny craters. Whoever was up on the roof was screaming. Just what kind of bomb had Wylan let loose? I would like to know also. It sounds like he had this thing loaded with shrapnel. Later on, when Matthias and Kaz show up, they have all kinds of little holes in their clothing. But they're not it doesn't, when it says the guys on the roof were screaming, it doesn't seem like any of the shrapnel came through their clothing. Kaz and Matthias don't seem injured. And I'm not really sure why they wouldn't be, and how they could have holes in their clothing without being injured, but there it is. So they go into the library, and there's a pretty great moment because Jesper's constantly telling everybody around them to calm down, that it's fine. He's waving a gun at the head of the library, who's just excuse me? And I love this moment. He's running through the quiet part of the library. There's a restricted section. And this other part that I thought was actually kind of neat. A squaller in a blue kefta stood in the corner, arms raised, but shrank back as they entered. Shoo! The squaller cried when he saw Wylan. I won't go with you. I'll kill myself first. Jesper's father held up his hands as if gentling a horse. Easy, lad. We're just passing through, said Jesper, giving his father another push. Follow me, said Wylan. What is a squaller doing in the rare books room? Jesper asked as they raced through the labyrinth of shelves and cases. Humidity. He keeps the air dried to preserve the manuscripts. Well, that's pretty wild. We don't have a system of air conditioning and climate control, so we'll get somebody full time to just sit there and handle it for us. Not a terrible idea. But the part that I was about to talk about before that I thought was really funny was them getting through this library and one of the girls stopping Jesper. A pretty blonde girl looked up from where she was crouched on the floor. Madeline, Jesper said, you said we'd have breakfast. I had to go to Fjerda. Fjerda? If I live, I'll buy you waffles. You don't have enough money to buy her waffles, Wylan grumbled. I like to imagine that Wylan grumbled not because he was irritated with Jesper not focusing, but because he was jealous. And I'm just going to go ahead and keep that one in my mind and continue to believe it. Nobody can take that away from me. So, not to be a podge, Jesper murmured to Wylan, but I wouldn't have thought you'd know your way around the rare books room. I used to meet with one of my tutors here, back when my father still thought... The tutor had a lot of interesting stories, and I always liked the maps. Tracing the letters sometimes made it easier to... It's how I found the passage. So, this is the first time that somebody really completely innocent who did not choose to be a part of this that is important to Jesper was involved in any one of these showdowns. And Jesper's really having some feelings about it. As far as he's concerned, his father being at risk is like kind of beyond what he's willing to get involved with. I love the way this is phrased. All he could think was, Dad could have been hurt. He could have died. Jesper was used to people shooting at him. He would have been a little insulted if they'd stopped shooting at him. This was different. His father hadn't chosen this fight. His only crime had been putting faith in his son. That's the problem with Ketterdam, Jesper thought as they stumbled uncertainly through the dark. Trusting the wrong person can get you killed. So, Chapter 6. Nina. Guys, Nina's not doing super well. I really thought, and this was more like hopefulness on my part than real logic, I really thought that once she got through the initial detox from the parem, that Nina would be okay, and that the memory of how sick she felt after the parem would be enough to keep her from wanting more, or really just to keep her from wanting to go anywhere near this stuff ever again. And it turns out that the memory of how terrible she felt afterwards is something that she has to consciously force herself to remember and think on and focus on, because how good and powerful she felt when she took the parem supersedes how terrible she felt later in her mind. That feeling of power and clarity was so profound that even being so ill she thought she might die does not prevent her from wanting more. That's a fact of drugs. Like, especially if you're getting into really hard stuff. People who are addicted come close to death all the time. And they know that they have come close to death, and they don't try and, that's not enough to make them feel like, and if anything, I think from what I've seen, people who are addicted and come close to death and make it out the other side feel more emboldened, because they're like, well, I survived. It'll be fine. Obviously, I need a lot more of this to kill me than I thought. So I'm not really in any danger, actually. And it feels like Nina, the constant white knuckling to get through the day is just wearing at her mental stability in a way that, I should have seen coming and didn't. And I respect the fact that this author is not taking the easy way out with her in terms of, making her just feel like, oh, you know what? I think I've got this thing beat after all. Nope. She is struggling. She is constantly wanting more. She has to force herself to remember how humiliating it was to be vomiting and shaking and weak in front of Matthias. And even making herself remember that is not completely enough. And another thing that I didn't think of, because why would I, is that her abilities as a Gresha have been negatively affected by the parem from day to day. So she isn't able to actually engage with her power the way she was before, without experiencing a deep craving for the drug, and without her power being less than it used to be, and more difficult to access, more difficult to control. It's just everything is more difficult for her now than it was. I did not see that coming, and that's tragic, and I'm super bummed for her about it. Something happens a little bit later that's very interesting, and I don't know what it means, but we'll talk about it. Jaime says she was so terrible to him and is ashamed of it. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of memories that she has of all of the different things that she offered him and offered to do to him in order for him to give her the drug. There was a night where she like crawled into bed with him and made it like she was trying to like stroke him and feel him up, but she was searching his pockets. And then to top off her humiliation at like resorting to this sort of tactic, he lets her know that he's completely aware of what she's doing. She's in the middle of trying to, quote, seduce him. And he just flat out says, I don't have it. And she realizes that he knows perfectly well what she's doing. And she's like so humiliated. And, you know, yeah, it's like, so the way that she's sort of coping is not really super healthy. She's like keeping herself isolated from everybody. She's trying to not use her power as often as she used to because it just causes these terrible cravings. She just did this bare basic tailoring, as they say, to her own face because she had deep circles under her eyes when she was trying to seduce this guy. And she really felt like she needed to look a little bit fresher and better. So she tries to remove the dark circles and she's able to do it, but it like almost levels her. And it's really tough for her to concentrate the rest of the night. And later on, when she's trying to do this job for, you know, getting past these guards, she almost can't do it. And then something else happens. But first, let's talk about this meeting. Jesper brings his dad to the crypts where they're all hiding on the, I'm trying to remember the name of this island. It's like something Vale, Black Vale, something like that. But it's the island that has all of these mausoleums on it that has a lot of like, there's a lot of stories about it being haunted, a lot of superstitions. So people aren't tempted to go there and like squat the way that they would in other areas. So it's pretty much only them and they're guaranteed that. And Jesper brings his dad. Let's see, I'm trying to find the spot. Oh yeah. She had no idea what to expect from Kaz. Anger, maybe worse. Kaz didn't like surprises or potential vulnerabilities, and Jesper's father was one very stocky, wind-chafed vulnerability. But after hearing Jesper's breathless, and Nina suspected abbreviated, description of how they'd escaped the university, Kaz simply leaned on his cane and said, "Were you followed?" "No," Jesper replied with a decisive shake of his head. "Wylan?" Colm bristled. "You doubt my son's word?" "It isn't personal, Dad," said Jesper. "He doubts everyone's word." Kaz's expression had been unruffled, his rough stone voice so easy and pleasant that Nina felt the hair rise on her arms. I love that. "Apologies, Mr. Fahey. A habit one develops in the barrel. Trust, but verify." "Or don't trust at all," muttered Matthias. "Wylan?" Kaz repeated. Wylan set his satchel down on the table. "If they'd known about the passage, they would have followed us, or had people waiting in the printmaker's shop. We lost them." "I counted about 10 on the roof," said Kaz, and Matthias nodded confirmation. So, this is when the whole story gets cooked up about Jesper. And I'm going to read this little section, because he talks about his father, Colm, is like, well, they moved up the date to pay back. And talks about how he like went to the cops looking for his son. And why were you shot at? I don't understand any of this. Why would you bring me to this horrible place? What's become of your studies? What's become of you? Jesper opened his mouth, closed it. Dad, it was my fault, Wylan blurted. Every eye turned to him. He was concerned about the bank loan, so he put his studies on hold to work with a local gunsmith, Nina offered. "Nina?" Matthias rumbled warningly. "He needs our help," she whispered. "To lie to his father?" "It's a fib, totally different." She had no idea where Wylan was going with this, but he was clearly in need of assistance. "Yes," said Wylan eagerly, "a gunsmith. And then I told him about a deal." "They were swindled," Kaz said. His voice was as cold and steady as ever, but he held himself stiffly, as if walking over uncertain ground. They were offered a business opportunity that seemed too good to be true. Colm slumped into a chair. "If it seems that way, then it probably is," said Kaz. Nina had the strangest sense that for once he was being sincere. "Did you and your brother lose everything?" Colm asked Wylan. "My brother?" Wylan asked blankly. "Your twin brother?" Kaz said with a glance at Kuwei, who sat quietly observing the proceedings. "Yes, they lost everything. Wylan's brother hasn't spoken a word since." "Does seem the quiet type," Colm said. "And you are all students?" "Of a sort," said Kaz. "Who spend your free hours in the graveyard. Can we not go to the authorities, tell them what happened? These swindlers may have other victims." "The authorities can't help you. Not in this city. The law here is profit. Jesper and Wylan tried to take a shortcut. The Stod Watch won't so much as wipe their tears. Sometimes the only way to get justice is to take it for yourself. We're going to get your money. You won't lose your farm." "But you're going to step outside the law to do it," Colm said. He shook his head wearily. "You barely look old enough to graduate." "Ketterdam was my education, and I can tell you this. Jesper never would have turned to me for help if he'd had anywhere else to go." "You can't be so bad, boys," said Colm gruffly. "You haven't been alive long enough to rack up your share of sin." "I'm a quick study." "Can I trust you?" "No." Colm took up his crumpled hat again. "Can I trust you to help Jesper through this?" "Yes." Colm sighed. He looked around at all of them. Nina found herself standing up straighter. "You lot make me feel very old." "Spend a little more time in Ketterdam," said Kaz. "You'll feel ancient." Yeah, so I like this whole thing. I like the way that everybody sort of partners together to, like, shield Jesper from the worst of his father's judgment, but also, you know, to protect the, like, reality of the story and everything. And Jesper is super determined to keep his father from leaving the farm. Like, his dad being here and the way that the loan that he owes has been manipulated and everything is, I think, bringing it home to Jesper how much more reason there is for them to come up against him in terms of his father's, like, being a bargaining chip. I don't think that he knew that they knew about his dad. So this is just an unwelcome wrinkle. I'm realizing how little time I have left to talk about what's remaining, so I'm going to speed through the rest of this. I'm sorry. Okay, so they head out, and Jesper gets his guns back. It's sort of sweet. Like, it's... All right. I'm just going to read this one part, I swear. "My revolvers!" Jesper exclaimed, clutching them to his chest. "Oh, hello, you gorgeous things." His grin was dazzling. "You got them back." "The safe at the Cumulus is an easy crack." "Thank you, Kaz, thank you." Any hint of the warmth Kaz had shown Jesper's father was gone, as fleeting as the dream of those golden fields. "What good is a shooter without his guns?" Kaz asked, seemingly oblivious to the way Jesper's smile collapsed. "You've been in the red too long. We all have. This is the night we start paying our debts." So, yeah, he gets them back for him, but makes it clear it's not a favor. It's not because I like you. These are the best guns for you to do your job properly. And Jesper should know better. Like, he wants so bad to believe that Kaz forgives him, and that's super duper not the case. So, they're heading into this, what we find out later is a trap, but we also find out this is not where it seems like they're supposed to be breaking into, because we think that they're going to get Nina, but they're not. They're going to get Van Eck's wife, which is a pretty low blow. That's some dirty pool, man. So Nina has to silence a couple of these guards, and she finds it really, really hard to do. And there's a moment that I think is really interesting. She's trying to, like, feel her way into their body the way that she does when she normally does this sort of thing. And she can't hear or feel any connection. And she was not going to be the reason this went wrong. Parem was supposed to kill her or leave her alone, not stick her in this miserable, powerless purgatory. Rage swept through Nina, clean, perfect, focusing anger. Her mind reached out, and suddenly she had hold of something. Not a body, but something. She caught a movement from the corner of her eye, a dim shape emerging from the shadows, a cloud of dust. It shot toward the standing guard. He swatted at it, as if trying to drive away a swarm of mosquitoes, but it whirred faster, faster, a nearly invisible blur. The guard opened his mouth to scream, and the cloud vanished. He let out a grunt and toppled backward. His compatriot was still balancing woozily on his knees. Nina and Jesper strode forward, and Jesper gave the kneeling guard a whack to the back of the head with the butt of his revolver. The man slumped to the ground, unconscious. Cautiously, they examined the other guard. He lay with his eyes open, staring up at the starry sky. His mouth and nostrils were choked with fine white dust. "Did you do that?" said Jesper. Had she? Nina felt like she could taste the dust in her own mouth. This shouldn't be possible. A corporalnik? Don't know how to pronounce that. Could manipulate the human body, not inorganic matter. This was the work of a fabricator, a powerful one. It wasn't you? I appreciate the vote of confidence, but this was all you, gorgeous. I didn't mean to kill him. So, what the fuck? And then Nina felt a strange crawling sensation all over her body, but the need for parem wasn't screaming through her any longer. Well, what the fuck is this? Excuse me? She able to access, like, the powers of a different type of Grisha now that she's, like, getting past her parem withdrawals? And the fact that whatever she did seems to have helped with the withdrawal, I mean, that's a big fucking deal. So, yeah, I'm just very interested in this new development. That's all I'm saying. Okay, so, final chapter in this section, Inej. Long story short, Inej is being used as bait because Mr. Van Eck is so positive that he has gotten Kaz to believe that he can come in and bust her out of here. And it's so... I really enjoy how it's written that Inej is simultaneously certain that this guy can't outsmart Kaz. And then immediately like, but can he though? Like, she has a lot of trust 1 second, and then the next second it's gone. And that's like, feels very real to me. That's human nature, right? Like, so her plan when she meets up with Van Eck in this theater is that because he wants to know all of the different areas that Kaz has used to store hidden goods or have meetups, or basically any area that he thinks is safe from prying eyes, that he could potentially be hiding this kid. And she decides that she's going to go and tell him a bunch of places that she's almost positive Kaz is never going to be, in order to buy herself some time and to buy Kaz some time to find her. Unfortunately, Van Eck is really smart and can tell as she's telling him all of this stuff that none of it is like anything. He is onto her from the start. And he says, "That's right, Miss Gaffa. Your hero is coming. Mr. Brecker likes to believe he's the smartest person in Ketterdam, so I thought I'd indulge him and let him outsmart himself. I realized that instead of hiding you, I should simply let you be found. I've been sending Bajan back and forth from Isle Comedy every day. I thought a Suli boy would be most conspicuous, and any traffic to a supposedly deserted island was bound to be remarked upon. Until tonight, I wasn't sure Brecker would bite. I was growing most anxious. But he did. Earlier this evening, 2 of his team were spotted on the docks preparing a gondol to launch. That big Fiending and the Zemeni boy. I did not have them intercepted. Much like you, they are mere pawns. QA is the prize, and your Mr. Brecker is finally going to give me what I am owed." So, at this point, she's kind of like, I know that you want this kid, but like, if you had just kept your end of the deal, you could have had him already. So maybe it's your own fault because you tried to double deal with us, and now you're like acting like, oh, he owes me. He was gonna give him to you. It's nobody's fault but yours that you don't have what you wanted. You're the one who tried to like fuck with us. And basically what he says is, I am not going to deal fairly with somebody like Kaz Brecker, who is beneath contempt and a criminal and ruthless and has no morals. And she's like, oh yeah, because you have tons. Whatever. He actually calls himself a patriot at one point, and she has to be like, this parem is going to like ruin the country. What are you talking about, a patriot? Get the fuck out of here. And he's like, it'll cause some trouble, but we'll get over it and it'll make things stronger. Whatever. Just the same fucking bullshit. And Jaime and Van Eck is like, you should have given him for free if you were really patriots. Yeah. I mean, this is exactly, don't get me started. I don't have time to get into politics right now. Okay. So he's in the middle of, like setting up this ambush, got all these guys lined up with guns pointed at this one door that he's waiting for Kaz to come in. And a kid in his own livery comes in. Not Van Eck, not what Van Eck expected. His face white, his corkscrew brown curls disarray. He wore the Van Eck livery of red and gold. What is it? Sir, the lake house. They approached from the water. Van Eck stood, knocking over his chair. Alice. They took her an hour ago. Alice. Jan Van Eck's pretty, pregnant wife. Inej felt hope spark, but she tamped it down, afraid to believe. They killed one of the guards and left the rest tied up in the pantry, the boy continued breathlessly. There was a note on the table. Bring it here, Van Eck barked. The boy strode down the aisle, and Van Eck snatched the note from his hand. What does it say? Asked Bajan. His voice was tremulous. Maybe Inej had been right about Alice and the music teacher. Van Eck backhanded him. If I find out you knew anything about this. I didn't, Bajan cried. I knew nothing. I followed your orders to the letter. Van Eck crumpled the note in his fist, but not before Inej made out the words in Kaz's jagged, unmistakable hand. Noon tomorrow, Godmedbridge, with her knives. The note was weighed down with this. The boy reached into his pocket and drew out a tie pin, a fat ruby surrounded by golden laurel leaves. Kaz had stolen it from Van Eck back when they'd been first hired. I love this. I love how completely unawares he is taken. I love that they are playing super dirty. I am super into this theory about her having an affair with the music teacher and actually being pregnant by him. And I love the fact that this makes Inej burst out into uncontrollable laughter. Like, she kind of loses it. She's been so stressed, and now she's finally realizing that, like, oh no, I didn't need to worry. They're totally coming to get me, and they're being really smart about it. And I can't believe I doubted that they would find me, and that I thought that Kaz was going to get outsmarted by this jag. And then this dude kind of like smacks her in the face and gets up in her face. And what does she do? She fucking headbutts him and like breaks his nose. So good. I love it so much. I love it. Vile, ruthless, amoral. Isn't that why you hired Kaz in the first place? Because he does the things that no one else dares? Go on, Van Eck. Break my legs and see what happens. Dare him. Console yourself, she said as Van Eck clutched the ragged corner of the table for support. Even better men can be bested. And that is the end of the section. So that was very enjoyable. So thank you very, very much to Jaime for commissioning this. I'm so glad to be getting back into it. And I hope that you guys are enjoying the coverage of it. And thank you all so much for listening. And yeah, I am hopeful that I'll be able to read the next section on this soon. Maybe one day I'll be able to do the Grisha trilogy, the like originals, but we'll see. Jaime says, I will commission more. Yay, thanks, Jaime. All right, guys. Well, thank you all again, and I will be seeing you soon with a new episode. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
was an Unspoiled Network podcast.